terms of what are you adding, Jimmy, you added a lot to all of us.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. That's
Thank you, Steffi. Well, we've got the wolf watching us.
I know.
That's Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, I've never really been described as a wolf before, so that's kind of interesting.
Steffi set us up. I have welcome back to DLD, the illustrious founder of Wikipedia, who now is starting a social network, which is a weird thing to do in 2019, late 2019. When did you start it?
We actually launched at the end of October, so very recently.
Right, and a social network. So tell me, why a social network? Why did you take? It looks like some of the Wikipedia DNA is involved in this, but why start this?
Yeah, so I just a few years ago I started a project called Wikitribune, and this is the sort of pivot, the successor to that. In an attempt to fight fake news. So what I was looking at was the question of, if you go to almost any news site, the structure of the social element of the site is the journalist posts their article here, and then down below that, the worst people in humanity yell at each other and yell at the journalists, and it's not very helpful or useful. And that's sort of as far as we've gotten in journalism with people actually participating. And I thought, well, look, that if you look at the Wikipedia community, the Wikia fandom communities, you'll see there's like really wonderful people who want to get it right. They want to do helpful, useful things online, and we're not harnessing any of that. And so I said, okay, well, let's look at what can we do in the space of journalism and community and so forth. And when I created that, it's actually very reminiscent of the early days of the Encyclopedia project. So before Wikipedia had a project called Newpedia, which was very top-down. It was very sort of organized along traditional lines, and it failed in no small part because it was too intimidating for people to participate. And so what I had done there is I had hired a PhD in philosophy to be the editor-in-chief, and we had a 7-stage review process to get anything published. So when I started Wikitribune, I hired a very senior, wonderful journalist, excellent journalist, and we set up effectively a 7-stage review process to get anything published. And basically, the community was very intimidated by that. They weren't really able.
That was the original.
That was the original Wikitribune.
You actually were going to produce content for that, weren't you?
Yeah. We did. I mean, we had 10 journalists, and I was really proud of the work that they were doing. It was good work. But we were a small outlet, and we were also operating in the same environment that all journalists operate in these days, which meant that when we were looking at how do we get more traffic, how do we get people to the site, you end up looking straight down the paths that everybody struggles with, which you don't want to go down, which is clickbait headlines and fluffy, cheap content. So and then I realized, actually I need to solve both of these problems. I need to make it much easier for people to participate, so it really needs to be community first. And we really have to restructure how are people finding news, how are people finding information. And this is when, with all that's been going on, Cambridge Analytica and all of these kinds of things, the realization that, actually as we heard in the previous panel, what I would say is that the business model of the social networks as it exists today makes it very hard. I think there are really good people there. It's very hard for them to solve this problem because inherently because they're advertising only, they need you to see as many page views as possible. They need to know as much about you as possible and so forth. And so functionally, they are naturally led down a path which we are, I think, finding as a society isn't healthy. It isn't really where we want to be with social network. So now I've launched a new social network, which is really more of in its current structure, is probably more of a direct competitor to Twitter than Facebook. It's very public. It's about news and so on. But the idea is, there's no advertising, no paywall. So I've been joking, a series of bad business decisions. That's how I've built my career so far. We're doing very well.
When you say there's no paywall, I mean, are the articles that are linked there sometimes in paywalls?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it is a social sharing site. People can post things, link things. It's unusual in that, unlike a traditional social network, everything on the platform, almost everything, is collaboratively editable. So if somebody posts something that is fake news or false, anyone else can correct it, can fix it and change it, update it, and so forth. And it's to be honest, it is primitive. I mean, we launched in October, sort of by accident.
What happened? Someone pushed the button by mistake?
Yeah. Well, I gave a speech. I was at in events like this, I was just mentioning it and talking about it just to get a few users on. And I was in Germany and in Cologne and spoke to a journalist, and that was a big mistake. Actually,
terrible mistake.
Terrible mistake. And the Germans, as it turns out, love Wikipedia, and they like the idea of privacy and so on. So we had a huge rush of people come on the platform, and so now today we're almost 500,000 people.
Wow, that's faster actually than Facebook grew originally.
Really?
Well, yeah. Well, they started in colleges.
Oh,
and, you know,
that's good. I'm going to start claiming that.
Yeah.
I'll say I'm not really sure, but Steven said it, so it must be right.
Well, I've just spent 3 years doing a book about Facebook. It took them a little while to get to the first million. They went pretty quickly after that. But I think one thing that happens not only in social networks, but just in the distribution of news in general, is that you say, well, this is a way to fight the clickbait and fight the empty calories of a lot of news. But people seem to take to that. It isn't really that these social networks start out saying, we're going to be the distribution for all the junky news and crappy misleading headlines. It turns out that's what people click on. How do you avoid that happening on WT?
Yeah, so this is where the business model comes into things. So if your business model is 100% purely advertising focused, then you optimize the platform and the algorithms and everything for engagement, time spent on site, number of minutes, number of ads that you see. Whereas our business model is you only pay if you want to. You don't have to pay. So it's very reminiscent of Wikipedia. Nobody has to pay for Wikipedia, but people do. And therefore, the incentives inside the organization aren't about how do we get as many clicks as possible. They are about how do we make a meaningful difference in people's lives. You have to say, at the end of the year, you have to say, like, this means enough. I don't have to pay, but I actually believe in this, and I'm going to pay for it. So if you're optimizing along that dimension, then you say, okay, people, I think people are of two minds. I mean, I think it's nobody likes to turn their head and stare at a car crash, but we do. We're humans. Nobody likes, I think I'm going to teach everybody a fantastic trick that I've invented myself and learned. When you see a clickbait headline that says, you won't believe what this child star looks like now, and then you click, and you've all done this, you click, and then it's like 30 clicks to find out what she looks like now. Just go to a search engine, go to Google and type, what does Marianne from Gilligan's Island look like now? There's the picture, you're done. You save 5 minutes. So you all owe me 5 minutes. But like that sort of content, right? We don't want to click on it, but we're like, what does Marianne look like now? Like, that's really interesting. I've got to find out, Even though you also say, actually, what I really want is I want a long read. I want something interesting. I want to sort of close my browser when I'm finished on the internet and think I've actually improved myself in some way. And that is a different set of motives. It's also part of the human condition. And so I think that if you, on the platform, you say, look, let's not optimize around the crap content. Let's actually give the community a means to go, yeah, actually we don't want that. It's not about getting as many clicks as possible. It's not about engagement. It's about finding things that are meaningful and sharing those.
What are the metrics for quality?
This is a very human question, and it's a very Wikipedia question.
A couple of humans. Let's go for it.
Yeah. So, from in the Wikipedia world, we struggle with this all the time. It's basically the fundamental hobby of the Wikipedian is to debate the quality of sources and to really chew on that question. And in some ways, the answer is obvious. It's with us. It's quite traditional. You look for academic sources, you look for quality books, magazines, newspapers. We all know the difference between a fluffy tabloid and a serious newspaper. It's pretty straightforward, really. And it's also difficult to get at if you have an advertising-only business model. And quality isn't really what you're that concerned about. I mean, I actually do argue to people at Facebook, and they are receptive to the argument that in the long run, if you're optimizing only on engagement and the number of ads people see, all of these side effects that we're seeing in society are happening. If the general public is convinced that your business is destroying Western civilization, that's a long-term problem for your brand. And I think they know that, but it's very difficult to deviate because that's what the numbers tell them to do.
Well, I'm wondering whether the problem, lies with us. None of us is going to go and type that into the search engine there, or even in, less salacious things. Even our premier publications now, use headlines to lure us in rather than just tell us what's in there. They want us to click through there. So we're not saying when we click on those things, when we see them on Twitter or Facebook, we're not saying we want to see low-grade stuff. It's just what interests us. And this is what puts the news business itself in danger there.
I mean, for sure.
Can your network handle that underlying problem? Can that make a shift in that?
Well, I mean, I don't think so. One of the things that I always say is that human beings are the same today as they were 500 years ago. Biologically, we're effectively the same. And so, of course, we have lowbrow interests, we have highbrow interests, we have all of these things. And I think if we are in an environment where the tools that we're using optimizes for those lowbrow things, then we're going to get more of that. And if you optimize for the highbrow things, you're going to get more of that. And so, wouldn't it be fantastic if at an editorial meeting, somebody said, "Oh, that we need to come up with something serious and hard-hitting because that's what gets traction. That's what gets advertisers," rather than saying, actually, our best, that's what we like to do. We're journalists and we're serious, but really we should just hire more funny millennials and write more cute fluff because they're cheap and that stuff is cheap to produce. And it's what drives traffic today. And I don't think that's necessarily the way things are. I mean, one of the things that I remind people is you've never, ever seen a clickbait headline in Wikipedia. And it's more popular than any newspaper in the world, and probably more popular than the top 20 newspapers in the world. And so there is a desire, like human beings, yes, of course, we like a little fluff, we like a little bad reality TV, but we also are in an era when people are watching, huge long-form drama of a degree of complexity you couldn't have even really thought about in the 50s or 60s. Right. And so that mix, I think it's easy to despair about the human condition and human nature when we live in an environment where the wrong things are optimized. But actually, we're not that horrible. We do want to know what that child star looks like now, but we also want to understand who we're voting for and what the results of the policy is going to be.
Right. Well, you mentioned Wikipedia. You're still on the board. I'm wondering whether in the age of disinformation, Wikipedia is going to be able to stand up to a lot more energy being put through to manipulate the entries there.
I mean, I think we're okay on that front, but the problem is, as all problems ultimately are, is more complicated and it's a subtle problem. So, the true fake news, which is a real thing, it's not sort of Donald Trump, that's anything he doesn't agree with is fake news, but there are fake websites, there's fake news, there's disinformation out there. That's had almost zero impact on Wikipedia. And the reason for that is, so that during the Trump election, there was a headline that went viral, a fake story that said, Pope endorses Trump, right? And it was shared thousands of times, I don't even know how many. And that's the sort of thing that if you show this to a Wikipedia, they're going to say, hold on a second. So first of all, the popes never endorsed political candidates. Second of all, this particular pope, he's quite famous for being apparently a very nice guy, so he probably isn't going to like Trump. It just seems unlikely. And so that's just not going to happen. And then you look and you say, oh, it's from, I don't remember where that one's from, but there was one called the Denver Guardian.
Yes.
Which, Denver, okay, everybody's heard of Denver. It's a city in the mountains somewhere. Guardian, okay, that's a famous news. It sounds like a newspaper.
Yeah.
It looks like a newspaper. But for the Wikipedians, they would say, hold on, I've never heard of Denver Guardian. They quickly do some research. And so it doesn't make it into Wikipedia because of that gatekeeper function of the community. Where I do worry more about Wikipedia in the current sort of environment is the demise. You could say local newspapers have been decimated, but decimated means killing 1 out of 10. It's far worse than decimated. Yeah. And the drop. So I'm from Huntsville, Alabama, which is a town of 200,000 people, and it effectively doesn't have a local newspaper now. When I was a kid growing up, I was a paper boy and rode my bike and threw the papers, just like out of the movies, And now the paper's published 3 days a week, but it's published out of Birmingham, a city 100 miles away. It's largely the AP Newswire, so it is what it is. And what does that mean for writing a Wikipedia entry about Huntsville, Alabama, and the local politics at this time? The history's not being written. The journalism is not happening, and I think this is devastating for the long run.
So what about your network? If you don't have the articles to circulate, the good fiber as opposed to the empty calories. That's the whole basis of your social network.
I think there's a few things. So we want to hire journalists. We want to put journalists in the service of these communities and say, look, if you want a journalist to cover your area, then if enough people sign up, we're going to hire a journalist to do that. I don't know yet. That's sort of later this year.
That's what you tried to do with the last iteration, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's hard. It's hard. I mean, but fundamentally, you have to solve the distribution problem is what I've decided. And therefore, hopefully the idea is you can find new ways and new models that do include supporting local journalism because it's crucial.
Are people donating to your social network? Are they?
So the objective was to get 1 out of every 200 people to pay. That was sort of my back of the envelope calculation. It's actually a lot higher than that already, so that's really good news. Of course, that's also the early adopters, so it's people who are fans of my work and so on. So I don't know long term, but so far it's working. And the pitch is, look, we know the reason it can't be behind a paywall is it's social, and not everybody's going to pay. You want everybody on the platform. Not everybody will pay, but enough people can pay. And to say, look, like, chip in, cover it for your friends, and then next year we'll bug them and we'll say it's your turn now. So
one final question is a more general one. Wikipedia is like one of the flagships of the original promises of the internet when we all loved it and we were all so optimistic about it, and now people are more cynical about the internet and what it's brought us. How do you feel personally about that? Clearly you have hope you're starting a new optimistic venture, but do you think the bloom's off the rose for the internet?
Well, I mean, I always say I'm a pathological optimist, so I always think everything's going to be great. That's why I have to hire pessimistic people around me to keep me sane. But I think, the internet is unbelievable, and the good that it's brought to the world is huge and enormous. And we're seeing interesting, new, and different problems. I will say it's not about good or bad, but for the first time in my life, I felt old on the internet when I downloaded TikTok. I'm like, what the hell are the kids doing? Off of my lawn, So, but I remain fundamentally optimistic. It's a fantastic tool, and it is, it's bringing the world together in new ways, and it's dividing the world in new ways. So
great. Well, you're certainly adding something. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Lovely.